Cato the Younger walked into the Roman Forum to campaign for praetor, wearing no tunic under his toga, no shoes on his feet, and no slaves at his side. In a city where magistrates dripped with dignity, he showed up looking like a beggar on purpose, and he had been training for that humiliation for years. This is one of the strangest disciplines in Roman political life, and Plutarch records it plainly in his life of Cato the Younger. Cato would go out in clothes that were considered shameful. He would eat standing up. He would travel without the entourage, every senator of his rank dragged along like a peacock's tail. Romans laughed. Cato kept walking. Why would a man with consular ancestors, a fortune, and a seat in the Senate deliberately court ridicule? Because he understood something most people never figure out. If shame can move you, shame can rule you. And in Rome, in the 50s BC, shame was the leash every politician wore. Think about what Roman dignitas actually was. It was your public face, your weight, your standing in the eyes of other men. Lose it and you lost everything. Cicero would weep over it. Pompey would start wars to protect it. The whole machine of the late Republic ran on the terror of looking small. Cato looked at that machine and decided he would not be a part on it. So he practiced. He trained his body to be cold in winter and hot in summer. He trained his mouth to eat plain food, and he trained his face to walk through a jeering crowd without flinching. Plutarch tells us his friends were embarrassed for him. Cato was not embarrassed for himself. Here's the part that matters to you. Cato was not a performance artist. He was inoculating himself. He knew that one day, men with real power, Caesar, Pompey, Crassus, were going to come for him. They would not start with swords. They would start with mockery, with rumor, with public shame. And if any of those weapons worked on him, the swords would never even be needed. So he got his shaming over with early. On his own terms. In a toga he chose. That is the rule. If you make yourself laughed at on purpose in small ways, no one can weaponize laughter against you in large ways. The Stoics called this premeditation. Seneca writes about it constantly in the letters to Lucilius, the practice of rehearsing loss, rehearsing pain, rehearsing disgrace, so that when it arrives it finds you already at home with it. He robs present ills of their power, Seneca says in letter 78, who has perceived their coming beforehand. Cato perceived it. He went to meet it. And if this is rewiring how you think about embarrassment, subscribe, because the rest of this story is where it gets sharp. Because the knives did come out. In 54 BC, when Cato stood for the praetorship, his enemies bribed voters openly to keep him out. He lost. The next year he ran again and won, but the consuls of 54, Domitius and Appius Claudius, tried to humiliate him in office, undermining his rulings, mocking his austerity, painting him as a freak. None of it landed. He had already been the freak. He had chosen it. There was nothing left to expose. Compare that to almost anyone else in late Republican politics. Cicero, brilliant Cicero, was destroyed for years by the shame of his exile in 58 BC. He wrote letters from Thessalonica, weeping like a child. Pompey, master of the Mediterranean, made catastrophic decisions in 49 and 48 BC, partly because he could not bear to look weak in front of the Senate. Their dignitas was a hostage. Anyone could grab it. Cato had no hostage to give. This is what the Stoics meant by an inner citadel, the phrase Marcus Aurelius uses again and again in the Meditations. Marcus writes in Book 4, "Men seek retreats for themselves, houses in the country, seashores and mountains, but nowhere can a man find a retreat more quiet and more free from trouble than in his own soul." The citadel is not a metaphor for hiding. It is a metaphor for sovereignty. The walls are built out of things you no longer need from other people. And Cato built his walls out of jeers. Ask yourself, honestly, what could someone do to you tomorrow that would wreck you? A bad photo, a leaked message, a rumor, a snub, a public stumble. Whatever your answer is, that is the leash. That is the thing other people can pull when they want you to move. Now ask the harder question. What would it take to make that leash useless? Epictetus, who had been a slave and knew exactly what real degradation felt like, says it cleanly in the Discourses. Book 1, Chapter 25. If you wish to be a philosopher, expect to be laughed at and mocked. Not endure it. Expect it. Walk toward it. Because the laughter of fools is not a verdict on you. It is information about them. Cato understood this in his bones. When he served as tribune in 62 BC, he stood against Pompey himself, the most powerful man alive at that moment, and refused him a special command. When he served as quaestor, he audited the treasury so ruthlessly that he humiliated senior men who had been skimming for decades. He could do this because none of those men had a hook in him. He had pulled out the hooks himself, one by one in public, wearing the wrong clothes. Seneca puts the principle nakedly in letter 18. Set aside a certain number of days during which you shall be content with the scantiest and cheapest fare, with coarse and rough dress, saying to yourself the while, "Is this the condition that I feared?" That is not a poverty exercise. That is a freedom exercise. You are checking the locks on your own cage and finding out the door was never bolted. You can do this, not theatrically, not in a toga, but concretely. Wear the unfashionable thing on purpose. Order the boring meal in front of people you want to impress. Sit in the cheap seat. Be the one who does not laugh at the cruel joke. Speak up when your voice will shake. Each one of those is a small Cato moment. Each one cuts a string, and here is the second twist most people miss. Cato's training was not about indifference. He was not numb. Plutarch describes him as a man of fierce loves and furious convictions. He wept when his brother Caepio died in 67 BC, and he wept hard, defying Stoic stereotype. The discipline was never about killing feeling. It was about removing fear of judgment from the list of things that could steer him. That distinction is everything. A Stoic is not a stone. A Stoic is a person who feels the full weight of life and still chooses the action that reason endorses. Cato felt the sting of being mocked. He just refused to obey it. And when the Republic finally fell, when Caesar crossed the Rubicon in January of 49 BC and the long war began, Cato fought him not for power, not for property, not for prestige, but for a principle. He retreated to Utica in North Africa. After the defeat at Thapsus in 46 BC, with Caesar approaching and surrender on the table, Cato spent his last night reading Plato's Phaedo, the dialogue on the immortality of the soul, and then took his own life, rather than accept a pardon from a man he considered a tyrant. You can argue with that ending. Many Romans did, but notice what it confirms. Even Caesar's mercy, the most seductive gift in the ancient world, the thing every other enemy of Caesar accepted gratefully, could not move Cato, because Caesar's mercy required Cato to feel small in order to receive it. And Cato had spent his whole life making himself unable to feel small. That is the operating system. Not stone-faced toughness, not contempt for others. A patient, deliberate removal of the handles by which the world steers you. You practice in small things so the large things find nothing to grab. Marcus Aurelius, writing to himself in his tent on the Danube frontier almost 2 centuries after Cato died, kept returning to the same idea. In Book 11 of the Meditations, he reminds himself, "It is the privilege of the human soul to love even those who wound it. The wound lands, the soul does not bend. That is the line every great Stoic walked. And Cato walked it first in a toga his enemies meant as a costume of shame. So the next time you feel that hot flush of being seen badly, of being laughed at, of being judged for something small, ask yourself what Cato would have done. He would have walked slower. He would have let them look. And he would have known, with quiet certainty, that the only person in that street who was actually free was the one with no shoes on. If that hit the like and subscribe. And I will keep bringing you the operating systems of the strongest minds who ever lived.